of two types. The kind of, ideological purists and have people have grudges since Hillary. It's there. And then there's some people who are willing to ignore, and then they have other obligations. They either have an obligation to Cornel West for X number, not very are, of two types. The kind of, ideological purists for, sorry. Now that'll be on the air. That'll be recorded. That's interesting.
What's happening?
Nothing. I'm trying to straighten out our little live stream. We can discuss this afterwards. Well, we can all say the F word. Welcome to it's the 7th of October, and welcome to Dis and Dat, and I'm going to yammer for a bit. I think it's an interesting article. Just came out, actually. I think it was original link was in Brave New Europe, and it's for me fascinating. It has a variety of other connections, and it is a set of observations by interesting people about interesting things in interesting parts of the world. So there's a lot going on in this one little piece that has other implications, and those folks who are interested in Latin American politics will find it actually quite interesting because it sort of verges into kind of where certain left governments are in Latin America. It also considers the idea that there's a certain variety of wouldn't call them orthodox, but I think that there is a kind of mainstream Marxism that does inform party politics in Latin America that is really important, and because it's just there, what's his name? Lula in Brazil has that thing, and this particular one has a commentary by Petro, the head of Colombia. So there's lots of stuff going on in this. One little article has all kinds of other little things going on in it that make it worthwhile. And one of the people involved in this article is Mark Roberts, as I recall. And I probably got everything wrong in this particular instance, but let me just say that there are a variety of folks involved. One person, and I have the ad here. Oh, Mental Health Day. Speaking of which, important. I don't know why it wound up on this Pluto page, but needless to say, there's Pluto is mentioned in here as well. Pluto and Verso are the publishers of Important Elements, and worth your reading if you ever get around to that sort of stuff. So I will shift back to what I was going to talk about. It's an article that has several different links. It links into a Scribe D file. It links to an entire site related to Marxism and Collapse, M&C, which is how I will refer to it as I read through this. It's interesting to see that they have a theoretical position, and that this theoretical position is one that tries to address artificial intelligence, Marxism, the theory of value, and a bunch of other stuff. And so this one little article, to me, is like a little gold mine, and it's a useful gold mine, probably even more useful for those who speak Spanish or who have interests in Latin American politics. Because, it does represent a kind of mainstream view that it exists, it's not simply a national point of view. It is a multinational view relative to Latin America. So people should just, you need to sort of have a sense that that's there, and it kind of wanders around in people's discourse. And this is sort of as a result of listening to the little thing on Cuba that we were listening to last week. So I will begin. And, the intro to it is a site called Marxism and Collapse. M&C has conducted a dialogue with an AI model called Genesis Zero, GZ, And so, it's a thought experiment. Can we get GDP to kind of address Marx? And that is what occasionally I fiddle around with, although I'm not doing it from a GPT point of view, and without getting too far in the weeds on large language models, because it's just, I'm not getting paid for it. But I do think that using Gemini occasionally, which I do, to give me a kind of outline for things I want to think about, it's actually quite useful. It saves time, a little bit of time, not much, and generally mimics my own search anyway, so I don't worry about it because I always know that it's just an outline, and I move to more deeper analysis. So the title is Marxist Artificial Intelligence Refutes Marxist Theory of Value. And it's a group, GZ, Genesis Zero of Marxist Artificial Intelligence. And so MNC, that is Marxism and Collapse, claims that there's a fundamental weakness in Marx's analysis of the dual character of use value and exchange value in a commodity. It's not uncontroversial. The MNC human trainer throughout provides leading questions to get GZ, Genesis Zero, to respond accordingly. That there isn't. Hello?
Sorry.
We're recording. We're live streaming right now. To respond accordingly, that there is a weakness in Marx's theory, namely that it leaves out nature as a source of value. GZ, that is Genesis Zero, then agrees that we need to amend Marx's value theory into some general theory of value that incorporates the value of nature. Let me stop there for a second. Now, the background to this, of course, is the kind of mainstream, if you want to call it that, and I think a mainstream practiced by a significant number of folks still, even if you are or aren't a Marxist or you're leftist of some kind, is the difference between a kind of human revolution and a human revolution that includes or excludes nature. And that question we've addressed, in our little place here, largely with John Bellamy Foster's book. But you can see by the time we get down several paragraphs here that they clearly don't like Bellamy Foster. So what would be that other position if you were a Marxist? Because frankly, I find Bellamy Foster's position actually quite compelling, particularly when you see it the way he frames it in the history of science in the 19th and 20th century. That said, this doesn't mean that it's a good leftist. You don't engage this kind of position because it is a kind of mainstream or normal or conventional position for a lot of folks, and that's, I think, why they've engaged artificial intelligence to sort of try to work through the discourse. This debate has been distributed mainly in Latin America and Spain. For example, in the Colombian newspaper, Desde, I'm not a Spanish speaker, Desde Abajo, although the previous English versions are also being widely distributed in several English-speaking countries. Even Colombian President Gustavo Petro has entered this dialogue, and this has sparked considerable interest. So at that moment, because Petro has a clearly left agenda, and he needs to do it for a whole variety of Bolivardian and a whole bunch of other reasons. And so, it's just important. Petro's not only president, but very interested in Marxist theory in relation to the environmental crisis and damage engendered by capitalism globally and in Colombia. And he's keen to find a way of bringing the law of value into measuring the ecological and environmental damage to nature caused by capital. See, that's not uncontroversial. He concludes from the dialogue that we need to amend Marx's law of value to incorporate nature, which he considers as missing from Marx's value theory. Note, of course, just let me break there for a second and remind you that we have had X number of decades working through this problem in English. It has not similarly been kind of worked through in the Latin American context because of a variety of reasons, some of which have to do with world systems theory, with Andre Gunder Frank, a bunch of other stuff that has tended to, as it were, dominate the discourse. It's anti-colonial post-imperial or anti-imperialist discourse, and a whole variety of other, things about settler colonialism, et cetera, et cetera, all of which have a viable position relative to developing, how we think about Marxism, et cetera. Petro has been using the ideas expressed in this dialogue in several oral presentations. I think both of these are in Spanish. Let us, and I've included the two links here, these are YouTube links. Let us consider this idea that Marx's value theory is inadequate, incomplete, and even false because it does not include nature as a source of value creation. I think this idea, this is Roberts talking, is unnecessary and also weakens Marx's value theory in its penetrating and compelling critique of capitalism. Marx starts Capital with this first sentence: the wealth of those societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities. Note the use of the word wealth, not value, but wealth. Marx is saying that all the goods and services that humans use is a measure of wealth. The value of this wealth is a different matter, and value only applies in the capitalist mode of production. Well, even that's controversial and problematic. We can work through that, but that's, we'll just move forward. In my recent book with Guillermo Carcetti called Capitalism in the 21st Century, which we should read, we briefly deal with nature as a source of value. Marx says that nature is a source of use value. After all, it's material stuff. Nature is matter, which provides uses which for humans: air, water, warmth, light, shelter, etc., without the intervention of human labor power. There are caves out there. It's quite possible to forage for all that stuff for sustenance. But while nature may have use value, but it does not have value under the capitalist mode of production. See, this is an important, and not a problematic question, ultimately. Value is created when nature is modified by human labor power to create a commodity owned by capital that can be sold, hopefully to profit, on the market. This is, the culture transforming nature. The environmental destruction of the forests by capitalist production, fossil exploration, mining, logging, clearance, land clearance, etc., all modern things, means a loss of the wealth of use values, but it does not mean a loss of value, that is, exchange value for capital. Not uncontroversial. But capital is not interested unless labor power is exerted on nature to create new use values that can be sold on the market. That seems, not problematic. So it's not necessary under capitalism to value nature. Well, and as Marx's law of value only applies to the capitalist mode of production, then it is not necessary to correct Marx's law. So it is ultimately all about these, what premise are you moving forward with? Indeed, one of the features of the dual nature of value in a commodity in capitalist production is the contradiction between use values, that is, humanity's needs and nature's wealth, and exchange value, between use value and exchange value. The commoditization of human labor and nature into products for sale for profit. This contradiction would be ended under socialism, communism, the modes of production called socialism and communism, where production would be direct to the consumer and for social use values or wealth alone. There would be no commodities. And that's important to imagine what the conceptualization of Marx in the first chapter of Capital, Volume 1, blah, blah, blah. There are no commodities, values, and prices, and thus human labor would be in harmony with nature, right? You herd stuff in the morning, you fish in the afternoon, you criticize at night, it's just perfect day. So there would be no law of value and no need to generalize or amend it. So it has a kind of fallacy sort of built into it, but let's not go there for the moment. Nevertheless, the MNC, this is Marxism and Collapse, Human in the Dialogue, wants to extend Marx's theory of value to include nature, as if it didn't before. So he or she has got the GZ AI model, artificial intelligence model, to develop some big generalized law of value. And this is no different, than Augustine or Aquinas or, people trying to work through stuff, ideological stuff. the rules don't quite fit properly, and so you've got to get the rules right. Marx's formula for value in commodities is made up of C, that is small c, the value of machines and raw materials used up in production, plus V, V as in Victor, the share of new value created in production, this is small v, new value created in production going to human labor, plus S, that is small s, the share of the new value appropriated by capital. Thus, total value equals C plus V plus S. It's not a drugstore, it's just total value. According to M&C, that is Marxism and Collapse, this is inadequate. And so GZ, that is the Genesis Zero AI, obliges with an extended formula for total value of a commodity that includes the contribution of nature N. And it just presents initially this formula as C, small c plus small v plus small s plus small n. But how do you measure N? Not in human labor hours, because the extended theory that says no human labor is involved. What about in physical units of trees, animals, rivers, etc.? That makes no sense, as Marx's formula is measured in labor hours. Combining hours with physical units is like measuring apples with pears. Perhaps small n could be measured in monetary terms, i.e. rents for land. But rent is part of a surplus value in Marxist theory, and it's already accounted for in S, that is surplus value. So there's no need for N. Maybe N could be measured as a stock of physical assets used up in production, right? But then raw materials are already included in C and Marx's value theory. So this just extension does not add up. N is sort of unnecessary in a statement that C plus small c plus small v plus small s plus n. Nevertheless, the dialogue moves on. M&C, that is Marx and Collapse, asks Genesis Zero, GZ, to join him or her in a combined attack on Marx's value theory. And again, the AI model obliges like a trained puppet. At all times, the artificial intelligence model always agrees with the human's questions, actually more like statements. It never disagrees. This is the problem of AI. According to M&C, that is Marxism and Collapse, and obligedly agreed upon by the Genesis Zero AI model, a proper theory of value should not be used on human labor alone, but include forests, animals, that is animal labor, and not just on hours of abstract human labor time, but also concrete labor, that is specific human and animal skills. And if you've been listening to me yammer for weeks on end, you'll note that this is a familiar issue. How is it that we, worry about this is the congealed labor problem, and also trying to reconcile reality, with thinking about how is it that value is created. So next section, the M&C, that is the Marxism and Collapse human, and the Genesis Zero artificial intelligence AI, now come up with a more sophisticated formula for including nature in total value. Total value is now made up of, just follow us here, human labor time, say, 300, whatever, plus some extra value from special concrete labor, including animal labor. Bees, for example, in their hives, or horses at work, say 75, plus nature, that is raw materials, say 300, plus some specific concrete, better quality nature, such as better forests, say 50. And so you add them all up and you get, 750. Remember, all this arithmetic is just, kind of arbitrary and not too capricious. It's claimed that this measure of value differs from Marx's value total, which would only include human labor time, which is 300. The extended model now assumes that 100 of that labor time goes to the subsistence of the human workforce. So in Marx's value theory, while surplus value would be 300 minus 100, or 200, while in the new generalized value theory, it would be 750 minus 100, or 650. So way more value is created and way more surplus value. That is more exploitation. Now, this exploitation, let's break here for a second. I'm not sure we get to more exploitation, but anyway. But the extended formula is faulty. First, the extended theory includes value transferred from machinery used up in production, small c. It only considers new value created, but total value in production is C plus V plus S. Remember, this difference is important because much of the extra value identified in the extended formula is already incorporated in Marx's value measure. Animal labor is not the equivalent of human labor. Well, it could be, but whatever. In the capitalist mode of production, horses, bees, and slaves are treated as machines or raw materials. So their contribution is included in the raw materials or machines used up in production, i.e. in C. The value of the commodity in Marx's theory of value thus already includes human labor, nature as raw materials used up, and animals as machines used up in production. There is no need to invent new forms of value. All this seems fairly obvious. This brings me to the question of whether machines create new value. This is the question that President Petro of Colombia is concerned with. It's an old issue about whether machines create value, including AI. Marx's answer was that value is only created by human labor power. Machines have value, but it is value created by previous human labor power to make them. They have use value, they raise the productivity of labor, but they do not create new value. This is the difference between Department 1 and Department 2. As Marx said, if human labor stopped working, machines would also. Even AI needs human input, right? At some moment, training, data, prompting, etc., as we can readily see from the Marxism and collapse dialogue with the GZ artificial intelligence. If there were only machines making machines and producing without any labor, there would be no value and no capitalist mode of production because the exploitation of human labor doesn't happen. But we're a long way from that. Moreover, human intelligence is creative and imaginative. For example, it thinks of things that don't yet exist, while machines and artificial intelligence really don't. Again, that's proven by the GZ model just regurgitating the M&C, that is Marx and collapse folks, leading questions into answers that the M&C trainer wants to have. In Marx's economic theory, abstract labor is the only source of value and surplus value. However, in the case of an economy where robots, and there is no human labor involved, surely value is still created. And this was the argument of Dmitriev in 1898 in his critique of Marx's value theory. He said that in a fully automated system, that is, at the end of the 19th century, you could conceive of a fully automated system. A certain input of machines can create a greater output of machines or of other commodities. In this case, profit and the rate of profit would be determined exclusively by the technology used, that is productivity, and not by abstract labor. If 10 machines produce 12 machines, the profit is 2 machines, and the rate of profit is 2 over 10, which is 20%. But value, reduced to just use value, has nothing to do with Marx's notion of value, which is the monetary expression of abstract labor expended by laborers. If machines could create value, this value would be use value rather than value as the outcome of humans' abstract labor. But if machines can create value, so can an infinity of other factors, that is animals, the forces of nature, sunspots, etc. And the determination of value becomes impossible. And so, if machines supposedly could transfer their use value to the product, this would immediately come up against the problem of aggregating the value of different use values, that is, apples plus pears, as in the extended formula presented by GZ above, that is C plus V plus S plus N. For Marx, machines can be valued, but they don't create new value. Rather, concrete labor transfers the value of the machines and, more generally, the means of production to the product. They increase human productivity and thus the output per unit of capital invested, while decreasing the quantity of living labor needed for the production of a certain output. So, it has an effect on sustenance. Given that only labor creates value, the substitution of the means of production for living labor decreases the quantity of value created per unit of capital invested. The Dmitriev critique confuses the dual nature of value under capitalism, that is, use value and exchange value. There is use value, things and services that people need, and exchange value, the value measured in labor time and appropriated from human labor by the owners of capital and realized by sale on the market. In every commodity under the capitalist mode of production, there's both use value and exchange value. You can't have one without the other under capitalism. But the latter, exchange value, rules the capitalist investment and production process, not the former. Value as defined is specific to capitalism. Sure, living labor can create things and do services, use values, artisanal production. But value is the substance of the capitalist mode of production of producing things. This is what separates, the transition from feudalism to capitalism. Capital, that is the owners of capital, control the means of production created by labor and will only put them to use in order to appropriate value created by labor. I mean, you need to have a market, you need to have commodities, you need to have people doing stuff in order to create money that helps stuff. Capital does not create value itself. So in our hypothetical, all-encompassing robot AI world, productivity of use values would tend to infinity, while profitability, that is surplus value to capital value, would tend to zero. You can see how that diverges, right? That one would, this is calculus. One would tend to infinity, the other one tends to zero. The essence of capitalist accumulation is that to increase profits and accumulate more capital, capitalists want to introduce machines that can boost the productivity of each employee and reduce costs compared to, other capitalists, other competitors. This is the great revolutionary role of capitalism in developing the productive forces available to society. I mean, Marx doesn't see the market as controversial. It just is there. You just got to work with it. But there is a contradiction. In trying to raise the productivity of labor with the introduction of technology, there is a process of labor shedding. New technology replaces labor. That happened in the 19th century. You bring in a machine, you don't need quite so many people. I mean, you have to train people and you got all this other stuff going on. Don't need quite as many people. And there's empirical data for this. Yes, increased productivity might lead to increased output and open up new sectors for employment to compensate. That is, people who are laid off, there are other secondary processes within the factory they could be involved in because that, may expand relative to productivity. But over time, a capital bias or labor shedding means new value is created as labor is the only, under this argument, labor is the only content of value relative to the cost of invested capital. So what you have, just let me break there for a second. It is about the system of equivalence and whether there is or isn't transitivity is, another argument. So there is a tendency for profitability to fall as productivity rises. In turn, this is infinity versus zero, right? So there's a tendency for profitability to fall as productivity rises. In turn, that leads eventually to a crisis in production that halts or even reverses the gain in production from new technology. Note that there are a lot of other variables here that we're just not paying attention to right now. This is solely because investment and production depend on the profitability of capital in our modern capitalist mode of production. This is not controversial. The key issue is Marx's law, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. A rising organic composition of capital leads to a fall in the overall rate of profit, engendering recurring crises. This is the fundamental Marxist thing, right? This is the organic composition issue, right? The key issue is Marx's law of the tendency of the rate of profit fall. A rising organic composition of capital, OCC, leads to a fall in the overall rate of profit, engendering recurring crises. If robots and AI do replace human labor at an accelerating rate, that can only intensify that tendency. Well before we get to robot all world, capitalism will experience ever-increasing periods of crises and stagnation. That's not very controversial either. So you can see that while Marx's value theory explains why the profitability of capital will tend to fall and thus engender regular and recurring crises of production and investment, the so-called better extended nature theory of value of the Marxists and collapse folks and the GZ, the artificial intelligence, only show an ever-rising amount of surplus value for capital without any crises ensuing within the capitalist mode of production. The crisis would only be environmental. There would be externalities involved, right? More waste, more pollution, whatever. The capitalist mode of production would have no internal integrated contradiction between profit and human social need. Capitalism tries to turn the free gifts of nature into profit. In doing so, it depletes and degrades natural resources, flora and fauna, organic and inorganic. However, there's a constant battle by capital to control nature and to lower rising prices of raw materials as natural resources are depleted and not renewed, adding another factor to the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. See above in the book, by Roberts and Carcetti, Capitalism in the 21st Century, which actually measures the hit to profitability from this. They actually do the math of this, or the empirical work. None of these arguments are mentioned in the Marxism and Collapse / Genesis Zero dialogue, which continues to try and come up with a more generalized theory of value that apparently includes intrinsic value, that is use value, plus transformative value. And this is the first time this is introduced, and that, it's a whole nother issue of this little argument. Applied human labor plus ecological value, the impact on nature, and social value, that is community well-being. So now you have, kind of 4 combined components in a value theory. Now we have a value theory that provides not only a critical analysis of the contradiction between value and wealth, use value and exchange value, or between profit and social need that Marx's value theory does, but instead a theory of the value of everything, whether under capitalism or not. This, in my opinion, this is Roberts, renders value theory redundant and frees capitalism from its contradiction and crisis. The dialogue talks of Marx's labor fetishism by leaving out nature as a source of value, and Marx's idealist approach by leaving out nature, and Marx's anthropomorphic, human-based approach by leaving out nature. Marx's supporters are also unscientific because they failed to develop value theory with a quote-unquote more nuanced analysis, so saith the artificial intelligence, that includes nature. A scientific approach would not stick at a staunch defense of every last syllable written by Marx. Instead, it would progress just as Einstein did with general relativity to amend Newton's classical physics or quantum mechanics, which has now amended general relativity. Marxism and Collapse, MNC, then takes the opportunity to single out the worst offenders in sticking with Marx's value theory. Their contemporary exponents who see nature as merely a resource reservoir, or at most a passive matrix subordinate to human labor activity as the only value generator, linked to the creation of new wealth, but excluded from the capitalist valuation process as a whole new area. British economists contemporary exponents are British economist Michael Roberts and Marxist intellectual Rolando Estarrita. Additionally, we can mention the positions of Argentina Trotskyists, academic commentators Esteban Mercatante and Juan Dalmaso, who are opposed to any theoretical expansion of Marxist orthodoxy to give a more prominent place to nature and economic analysis. And I bolded it here. Socialist ecologist John Bellamy Foster is also attacked as another defender of Marxist orthodoxy. Now, I find that that's not uncontroversial in the sense that Bellamy Foster is more orthodox. You can argue, in fact, that he really hasn't taken it to where it should go, but, whatever. The GZ, artificial intelligence model, obligingly backs Marxism and Collapse and goes further by claiming a false consciousness on the part of these contemporary Marxist orthodoxists. The refusal to consider the role of nature in value creation as theoretically legitimate may stem from a reluctance to deviate from established Marxist doctrine rather than a comprehensive analysis of value creation. So, we're indoctrinated and not scientific. Thanks, GC, or more appropriately, M and C. Finally, what is all this dialogue about? It seems that the Marxism and collapse folks are convinced that Marx and Engels disregarded the role of value of nature as opposed to humans on the planet. But this is a travesty of Marx and Engels' views. Let me quote Engels from his early work, Umrisse, to be found in my book, blah, 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 Engels in the year Engels 200. To make Earth, this is Engels, to make Earth an object of huckstering, the Earth, which is our one and all, the first condition of our existence, was the last step towards making oneself an object of huckstering. It was and is to this very day an immorality surpassed only by the immorality of self-alienation and the original appropriation, the monopolization of the earth by a few. The exclusion of the rest from that which is the condition of their life yields nothing in immorality to the subsequent huckstering of the earth. Once the earth becomes commodified by capital, it is subject to just as much degradation as labor. And then from his great book, Engels' great book, The Dialectics of Nature, thus at every step we're reminded that we by no means rule over nature like a conqueror over a foreign people, like someone standing outside of nature, but that we, with flesh, blood, and brain, belong to nature and exist in its midst. And that all our mastery of it consists in the fact that we have the advantage over all other being able to know and correctly apply its laws. Engels continues, men not only feel, but also know their unity with nature, and thus the more impossible will become the senseless and anti-natural idea of a contradiction between mind and matter, man and nature, soul and body. It is not Marx and Engels who disregard the role and value of nature. It is the capitalists, at least until it has now hit them in the face with climate change. For Marx and Engels, the possibility of ending the dialectical contradiction between man and nature and bringing about some level of harmony and ecological balance, metabolic, right? Ecological balance would only be possible with the abolition of the capitalist mode of production. This conclusion seems to have been lost by our Marxists of collapse. Okay, so I ended my little reading here. I hope you could follow this. It is worth reading because it does represent, there's some fallacies built in the argument and, some logical premises that are problematic for a variety of reasons and would require a lot more writing. But, the point is there's a kind of privileging of using AI discourse. And you could say that it is a dialectical move by a Marxist and collapse folks that they would attack. I would assume it's an attack on AI by assuming that it doesn't assume that crises are going to occur and, contradictions are going to occur. It's just, it's just all going to happen. AI in this context becomes the perfect historical materialist. And we know that's kind of a problem. History still goes on, even though people will proclaim the end of history. So, there's already issues. More interesting, of course, is that the president of Colombia is kind of fascinated by this idea, and he's willing to sort of have it kind of percolate. I assume that there are intellectuals in Colombia trying to work through this, not only for him, but in general. So, whatever. There's going to be more discourse on this, and I thought that I would bring it to our little group to show that some of the same arguments that we've been fiddling around with and that we've been arguing through in various interesting ways, the fully automated luxury communism, which is just simply a position. On the one hand, that's kind of what we expect. On the other hand, we may never get there. And so that's kind of the puzzle that we want to sort of work through. And in this particular way, we can demonize AI. But as I said, AI is a tool, it's a technology, just like anything else. And I think that it's worth sort of working through the problem and working through the problem even further by people who are spilling lots of ink in its critique. And also that it's being commented on by the same guy who writes what did he write, the foreword or the afterword to the new the new translation of Marx's Capital Volume 1 that just came out last month. Okay, so that's all I have to say. Are there other Comments, brickbats, spinning mule, flying shuttle. So we're supposed to have a problem with exploitation. Well, it's not well explained. Let's say that exploitation is not as well explained as it should be. And in fact, that's why the financial capitalism stuff we've been fiddling around with is important, because some people would claim that no exploitation is going on by financial capitalism, since it's all about, illusory things, things by capital, and it's not about labor.
Well, that was one of the things that came up for me yesterday was this idea of technology and its role in the sundown or the sunset of a hegemony. And, um, I was like wondering, oh, is AI the sort of the technology that's going to be associated with the end of the U.S. hegemony? Kind of like with the Dutch and the wind and the British and coal to then be, surpassed by the U.S. and oil.
Oh, yes.
Is AI going to be part of, what is the end of, the coming end of the U.S. hegemony?
There's somebody yelling in the background. Is that me yelling in the background?
Not here.
Uh, yeah, it is it's a problem at different levels. I think there's an argument in terms of design of weapon systems, for example, that AI, optimizes a certain set of decision making that needs to go on in weapon systems. The big question, of course, is the human component of that and the rules under which you have an AI operate. That's all.
The targeting, right?
Well, it's kind of redoing an element that we saw as an example in both Failsafe, the movie Failsafe, and its parody, Doctor Strangelove, right?
The Doomsday Machine.
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell the world?
He loves surprises. We were going to talk about it at the next party Congress. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think the
I was
real
thinking,
the logical extension from what you were just saying, though, wind, coal to oil, is fusion. And what country and what industry is going to master fusion? Because that's the future,
Yes.
I think, and if we can develop fusion here in the United States and make fusion reactors, that will be the future. I don't, I have, I am no, I am no engineer, so I have no idea who's who's in the lead in that department. Not a clue.
Well, it's
But that
just
would
it's a very provocative question and really important, and we can see with the Pons and Fleischmann
Oh
hoax
God, yeah, the cold
of
fusion.
cold fusion, that it is very
I I did a play about that.
oh, cool.
It's an interesting story. Your quote, the quote was really great. What was it? Earth about or commodity? Can you read Earth? Uh, how did that go? You just read it.
I don't know. It's probably angles.
Commoditizing Earth. What was that? It was
Oh, I
you
don't
just
know.
read it, and I was like, oh, that's a great quote
I don't
because
know.
we don't, what's not ever factored into this, is
Oh, it's subject of degradation. It's actually
yes, that's
Roberts quoting Engels. Yes,
okay. That's a great quote because it's
it is.
true, and it's where we are. I mean, we've completely commoditized the earth from property to extraction to all of that, and of course,
people.
and people, and well, I'm just talking about the actual environment at this point, physical environment, and what's never figured into. Well, what is the value of this product that's been created? Well, what we never factor into the value is the externalized cost of creating that product in terms of energy consumption or waste. I mean, now that, our entire planet is filled with microplastics, and even our bodies are filled with microplastics, the cost, how do you calculate how do you factor into economically the cost of the plastic packaging that my salad comes in, that I supposedly I throw out, and I think I'm recycling it, but of course I'm not. I mean, that's all externalized, not to mention the,
Yes.
just when we talk about AI, I mean, the cost of, and we talk about, the energy cost of running all of these computers, not to mention like quantum computers that are going to need even more energy, and not to mention super cooling and all that. I mean, that's going to just be, the energy cost of that is going to be enormous.
Yes. It's precisely the problem. You can raise that at a much simpler level relative to recycling.
Yeah. Recycling's a fucking myth. I mean, 2%, I think, is what actually gets recycled. Is what I heard. I could be wrong, but
Okie dokie.
Nate, you have a question?
Because you do
Yes,
some days anyway,
host,
right?
Rock John, someone, mute Rock John.
So tomorrow you've got to bring this thing to the
Rock John. Okay, sorry.
because you can't drive it.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Okay, so yeah, this is the second time I've heard you mention, just fairly casually. So I'm sure you're just kind of speaking off the cuff, but well, that AI is just another tool. And you allude to the amount of ink being spilled, critiquing it, criticizing it. And two things. One, I mean, obviously, I know there's a lot of highly ill-informed criticism or just beliefs about it. First of all, the fact that it should even be called intelligence, in my opinion. but secondly, I guess I just, I wonder what you think about this as someone that's, studies economics deeply. So I know someone who's really big on AI and the idea that it's going to make our lives so much better. And he'll often just say it's in human nature to try and make work easier. And that makes sense, right? That generally is true. But these tools are not being developed by workers as such. And so they are in recent times, or at least this particular tool, the internet, if you want to view that as a giant collective tool, what have you, computers, they're, in this context, the context of a highly capitalist-oriented world and definitely country, they are used to make, they are designed and being attempted to be implemented to increase profit, not to make work easier.
Well,
is my suggestion.
That's one outcome. Yes, absolutely.
But what does it mean? I guess, I mean, maybe to simplify it, I don't get this notion that a tool is just a tool.
Well, to misquote Bill Clinton, it depends what is.
Jeez. Okay, we'll have to revisit this.
Well, don't even.
but
that's
no,
a sort of
sorry.
point of this, is that tool and technology, are not wholly neutral in this process. The whole explanation in a Marxian model is that, they're not wholly neutral. They represent use value, but they also represent exchange value. I think that the movement forward for Marxism is to talk about it's organic, it's interrelated, and to create these sort of artificial divisions only hurts the argument.
Mm.
Right. I mean,
Even the
What-
proponents of AI, they,
What-
they say of the five steps to get to AGI, we're only on the first one.
well, and as Travis Kalanick, I think he was the guy who founded Uber, right? Said
Right.
it's a great business model if we can just get rid of the driver.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Once you get rid of the drivers, you're really making money. Because you don't, and they will. I mean, it's only a matter of time before a car pulls up and picks me up, and there's nobody in there. It's just an AI.
Well, wait, James, you mean this was not the advent of the great sharing economy?
Yeah, right. The gig, yes, the sharing economy.
At least they dropped the sharing part.
Right. No, they're not saying that. And
But that
the only
was
sharing,
the
only
hype
sharing
at the
economy
beginning.
that exists is if you go buy a pizza and you let other people have some slices for free.
Yes,
That's the sharing economy.
I'll share my
I think
pain.
it's all about, you create a technology and it's all about who exploits it and how effectively, and how much they can keep others from exploiting it.
right. Well, interesting, because I mean, one of my thoughts, I mean, I was no longer driving taxi when the rideshare companies came on in Madison, but it did occur to me, I don't know, probably everywhere, but definitely here, there were a fair number of highly educated cabbies, and some of them, probably at the very least amateur coders. Um, like maybe rather than, I mean, who could have foreseen or thought this? But anyway, it seems to me too bad that rather than fighting, well, as probably you all know, right? The approach Uber took was in Airbnb and whatnot was to just come in, do what they were going to do, become so popular that their flouting regulations just became a non-issue because everyone liked them and the cities just gave in, and
Yeah, it's called
so
move fast and break things.
move fast and break things. So rather than, but of course cabbies and cab companies here, and I assume other places, fought that, failed. What would have been better, and I just, I wish I could turn back the clocks and been part of it, would to be like harness any skills, any technology skills or computer engineering skills anyone had that was a cabbie or involved in the business, and develop a really cool local system that would give people the efficient service that, they now expect and receive, although of course the prices are now jacked up, so they're not getting the prices they were loving so much, but they're still getting fast service, much faster service here anyway.
Yeah.
It just seems like maybe a local company could have, got a phone app service going for their business in time to compete with Uber. It's just too bad we didn't do that.
Well, it does exist in certain places. When I was in Sri Lanka working a bunch of years ago, I was trying to use Uber to get little, tuk-tuk rides, and they said, no, use Pick Me. It's a local app. It's basically the same as Uber, but it was developed in Sri Lanka by Sri Lankans, and it worked a lot better. And boy, it was half the price of of what Uber was charging. So
cool.
I downloaded Pick Me and used it, and that's how I got around all those little tuk-tuks.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Cool.
The last
cool.
thing I'll say, about comment about the lecture was, does it matter if the bees are unionized? Does that make a difference?
And John here with the elevator operator comment. I suppose next we're going to hear about the stagecoach drivers and the horses.
Well, actually, I will say this. Here's the thing. I mean, here's where technology has helped me tremendously. I used to build models, physical, three-dimensional models for my work. I used to buy cardboard and buy, materials, art supplies, and physically build a model. And it took a long time. It took hours and hours and hours, and cost a lot of money, especially for like a Broadway show. A model could cost thousands of dollars when you have intricate details that need to be laser cut and all that. And now I do it all on the computer. I do it all by myself, mostly by myself, using a 3D program. And the cost of that has dropped dramatically. And the quality of what I create improved dramatically, meaning I can create something that looks almost exactly like what you're going to see on stage or in the studio or in the event. That would have been impossible. What I do now would have been impossible 20 years ago. And it really changes the economics of what I do.
So are you getting paid more for doing a faster job with less people? Probably not.
Yeah.
Not a
No,
lot
I
more.
am.
Not that much more.
I get paid more because it costs me less, and I can charge more. I charge the cost of building. I'll charge for just modeling the venue that I'm in, and then I'll charge for I can't say I charge more. I get paid more in the theater world because those costs are fixed, meaning in regional theater and even Broadway, there are favorite nations. There are contracts that are negotiated, and you only get paid so much. But the less
what's important here, James,
the more.
It sounds like you're self-employed, right? Then I didn't know
Yes,
that. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, I have my own company.
Yeah, in which case you're much more likely to it's not a criticism, but it's just you're more likely to benefit from this kind of efficiency than if you were an employee.
Yeah, for what I do, in the same union as you,
Yep.
we get sometimes less crew people and less pay for certain productions, despite all the advances we've had over the years. It depends on the production, but quite often it's less, and like quite a bit less. Like sometimes it's under 50% of what your supposed standard rates are supposed to be, and you might have a 2-person crew in the sound department instead of 3, things like that. And you have to finish it faster too. You have less time to make the production in a lot of cases. And the writers are getting that kind of shit now too, and who knows what else is going on. I mean, the actors are worried, as we know. They're worried about their kind of personalities and images being used by AI in the future. But we'll see about that.
Well, yeah, that's a whole battle unto itself. The whole, right, the right to your image.
The basic gist of what I'm getting at applies to a lot of these factors that you guys talked about when I caught it anyway, when I got in here. Things like Uber and Lyft taking over the businesses that used to be for taxi drivers, maybe offering better deals, until just same goddamn thing that Walmart and Amazon have done. They take over mom and pop with the lower prices and whatever else they can do to catch people's attention and affinity. then once they've done that, they jack up their prices once they've destroyed mom and pop or the taxi driver or whatever. More. So basically, they have all these futuristic scenarios like, yeah, someday, this is stuff you'd hear decades and decades ago, my parents' time or my grandparents' time. Someday you won't have to work. You don't have to work 20 hours a week, or maybe not at all, because everything will be done automatically and you won't have to work as hard and work as much. So that never seems to happen because they want more money no matter what. They always want more money. Well, that's the problem.
And what is expected? They expect, wow, quiet. They expect more. And that is one thing I will say that has changed the factor in what I do, is the expectation that design revisions will happen in 24 hours. Like, well, you'll have those revisions tomorrow, right? I'm like, no, it's going to take me longer. Well, you were so fast. And it's like, no, it's gonna take longer, and and it's going to cost you. But every time with the technology, the expectation on the client side or on my boss's side is not one of more product. Well, it's more productivity, meaning you'll get it done faster, right? And I'm constantly fighting that.
Thank you for thank you for all the relevant input. I would assert in various instances, just to go back to the cab example, if you mandated, and this is a regulatory matter from a public transit point of view in terms of subsidies, et cetera, that cars could not be the vehicle for ride sharing. That is, you could only use small buses, let's say. You could actually optimize the benefit for more people. It's an argument and probably not applicable in all cases, but I would assert to you that there are other forms that make this a better idea. For example, my town is not highly dense in terms of population density, but it's perfect for minibuses that would be, organized according to some sort of automated system that, if with proper advance warning, could actually be done fully automated by a self-driving bus. It could not be done by self-driving automobiles, for example.
Yeah, no, I mean, right. And this is a case. I mean, I guess this is part of my point of a tool is just a tool. I mean, I guess in the sense that this tool could be used for either of these modes, the one you were just describing, or the current mode, or what Uber's trying to do. I guess in that sense, it's just a tool. So I mean, in that way, I guess you answered my question sort of there. But at any rate, I like that idea you're describing. I do think there are useful. Yeah, I think these things could be used in a way that I would certainly think is beneficial, and I would get behind. I mean, if I was still a cabbie, it would suck to lose the job either way, but the taste in my mouth would be a lot less sour if it were what you just described.
Well, no, there'd be a pricing model. You could actually have a pricing model, and in fact, congestion pricing is somewhat like that. In other words, you'd have a normal system that would have short buses, as it were, as the sort of standard. You wouldn't need big buses. You just need short buses, smaller buses. And for those people who need to get someplace for an emergency or for some other reason, that you would pay more to get, the personalized Uber type transportation.
Yeah.
And it could be self-driving. I mean, whatever.
No, I remember when I was in Mexico City, there was something, I mean, it had nothing to do with technology because I was remembering this in 92, but I forget what they called these. They had the regular dedicated route buses, but there were these smaller buses that would flash a destination as they came up. And from what I could tell, the destination, they would end up reflecting a very real time ebb and flow of demand. I found it really quite exciting to jump on them and try and figure out what was going on.
Yeah, there have been moments where when I was growing up, whatever, shows how old I am, we had a really good bus system, public bus system, but there were, because of speed or some other cultural thing, you would have these smaller minivans, 8-person, 10-person minivans who would function slightly faster and slightly cheaper on the same routes. So, and some were licensed and some were not licensed, and it got a little weird, but it never lasted because economically it just wouldn't last. But you could see that informal economies occur at that same level. With all due respect to lesser developed countries, that's exactly how it works. Similar to car services in New York City, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that economy exists actually at the George Washington Bridge. When you're because I used to do this a lot when I was still living on the other side of the river. You would go to the George Washington Bridge, and there's a bus terminal there right before you cross the bridge. And you could take the bus, you could wait for the bus, or you could take one of those little vans that would charge you like $3 or $4 to go over. And all the vans did was they went across the bridge, then they came back, then they went across the bridge again, and they went back. Or you could wait for an individual, a person who is looking for just getting another person in the car so that they could get the reduced pricing when they cross the bridge. Because there was a reduced pricing. I don't know if it still exists, but it's cheaper if there's 2 people in the car to cross the bridge. You do get a reduction. And we're talking, it costs $16 to cross the George Washington Bridge normally. I mean, it's not cheap. So there's a whole micro economy of opportunity that exists just to get people across the George Washington Bridge.
Yeah, they used to do that in California at the BART stations. So people would just stand in a separate line at the BART station to get in. They're at a rapid transit site, but they would stand there waiting for people who needed the extra people in their cars.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to, go through the high occupancy vehicle lanes.
Yeah, to get into the HOV. Yep.
And it was incredibly anonymous. I mean, some people would just get in, not talk to the person, and get out at the other side. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken the risk a number of times, gotten in the car with somebody, chatted for a few minutes. They're almost always pretty nice, rarely. But you were taking a risk, certainly. They're not insured or anything, so.
Oh no, it has all kinds of issues. But can be fun. You can meet new people, and that's kind of a good thing too. Let me stop now so that we can be profane. And thank you for contributing. And we'll try this again tomorrow with something equally, hopefully, as